and sisters in Christ, grace and peace to you from God our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Goodness is stronger than evil. Love is stronger than hate. Light is stronger than darkness, and life is stronger than death. These words of Bishop Desmond Tutu remind us that kindness indeed brings justice in our world. I had not intended to be in front of you in worship today. When Marlene contacted me, I had another engagement this morning. And so I, in turn, contacted one of our Migrant and Refugee Leader Academy alumni named Tika, who lives in Harrisburg. And Tika was prepared to speak with you this morning, as you see in the bulletin. And then Friday evening, Marlene and I each got an email from Tika saying that the baby in his family that was supposed to be born at the end of this month was probably going to be born Friday night. And that is indeed what happened. And so we rejoice with Tika and his family as they welcome a new member into their family and into the family of those who love and serve God. And pray God's blessing on them during these early days of that newborn's life. It is such an honor to be with you this morning on the time of your ingathering. You perhaps do not know that the building that Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service occupies in Baltimore is right next to Inner Harbor, and we share that building with Lutheran World Relief. And in fact, in front of the building is what's called a quilt plaza. And it's made up of bricks of different colors that make quilt patterns in the entry area to the building. And so it will be with great excitement that I let our neighbors on the 4th floor know that I was with you this morning, and I hope that someone can send me some pictures of the wonderful things that you've gathered. It was so inspiring to see your young people bringing the kids forward that will go, who knows where in the world, and be shared with other young people just like you. So this is a busy day. Not only is it Ingathering Sunday, it is also the recognition of those who have served our country in the military, and we are so grateful for all of the veterans who are recognized here this morning. I am going to have to crane my neck to see exactly where we are with the slides that you can see. But I want to begin this morning by talking about the time immediately following World War I, when many people had been displaced from their homes across Europe, and refugees were coming to the United States seeking welcome, seeking a new life. It was during that time that in the United States there were many bodies of Lutherans. Some of you probably remember when we were Lutheran Church in America and American Lutheran Church. Those two bodies came together in 1988 to make the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. But prior to that time, there were years when there were over 200 different Lutheran bodies in this country. Well, all of those Lutherans realized that they could do much more together than they were doing separately. So they came together to form the National Lutheran Council. And some of the first work of National Lutheran Council was to sponsor refugees and displaced persons who were coming from Europe. This work began officially in 1939. Not 1 year elapsed before the work began to shift, because the messages coming from Germany were talking about Lutheran pastors who were being removed from their congregations. The reason was that their families could be traced with some Jewish blood. And perhaps you are aware that on November 9th, just Friday night, was the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the night that Jewish synagogues were burned and Jewish businesses had the glass broken out of their windows. At the same time, Lutheran pastors who were not completely Aryan were being removed from their congregations. And so a plea went out to Lutheran congregations across America, can you help? And Lutheran congregations responded. At that time, to come to the United States, there needed to be in place what was called a sponsorship, a family or an organization who could promise a job and housing and the first things that are needed in those initial months of a new life in a new land. Lutheran congregations responded, and Lutheran pastors and their families were brought to the United States. And you can change the slide. At the heart of Lutheran theology is the care for our neighbor. We are freed by God's grace to live out our vocation as neighbor. We as followers of Christ are called to live out God's commandment to love God with our whole being and love neighbors as ourselves. For it is in the neighbor that we see the face of God. And if you would go to the picture of the man with 2 children, German refugees. The German pastors started coming from 1939 until the bombing of Pearl Harbor, when all immigration stopped. But then following the war, many, many Lutherans were displaced in Europe. And again, the plea came, can you help? And the call went out to Lutheran congregations, and they responded. During that time, Lutherans and many people of German descent were welcoming people like us, other Lutherans from Europe, other Germans, other people of Scandinavian descent who shared much with our own background. And then the next slide, in the 1950s and 60s, when that immigration had settled down, there was a revolution in Hungary. Hungary, my name Baglios is Hungarian. Hungary is home to many Lutherans. So again, Lutheran congregations were called upon, and Lutheran congregations responded, opening their hearts and their doors to settle refugees who were displaced because of the Soviet occupation of Hungary. This continued into the 60s, and when that immigration began to slow, the question that Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service asked was, who else shall we welcome? Up to this time, we had been welcoming those who were displaced or refugees, because they were Lutheran. But in the 1960s, the focus began to shift, and our purpose became to do this work not because the people we are helping are Lutheran, but because we are Lutheran. And we take seriously the verse from Matthew where Jesus says, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me." In the 1970s, in Uganda, Idi Amin came to power and refugees were fleeing for their lives. If you have heard of the St. Barnabas Center in Harrisburg, raise your hand. A few of you have heard of it. St. Barnabas Center is a joint ministry between Lutherans and Episcopalians in the Harrisburg area. And in the 1970s, the priest, the Episcopal rector who was called to that ministry, was Bishop Ben, who had been the bishop of northern Uganda. And it was through refugee services that he was able to come to the United States and then led that congregation in the north side of Harrisburg. In 1975, I saw veterans stand up this morning. If you're a veteran of the Vietnam War, raise your hand. My brother fought in Vietnam, and in 1975, we watched with great interest as South Vietnam surrendered to North Vietnam, and those Southeast Asians who had fought with the United States during that war needed to flee for safety. What's pictured here are the boats that carried many of them to Guam or other locations where they could then be transferred to the United States. The U.S. government made a call in late April of 1975 to Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. At that time, the work of LIRS was at a lull, and there were, in fact, 4 staff people with LIRS. The U.S. government said, "We are bringing 125,000 Southeast Asians to the United States. We're going to take them to 4 military installments. One of them was Indiantown Gap, the military installation there. There were 3 others across the country. Can you Lutherans process them?" And so the staff at LIRS called Lutheran colleges and said, "We need people to come and do this work." So professors and students finished their school year, end of April, went to these 4 bases, and it was Lutherans who did the work of processing the first wave of immigrants who came from Southeast Asia. Many, many Lutheran congregations became sponsors for individuals and families. And if you were a sponsor or know of a congregation who sponsored a family during this time, raise your hand. Yeah, more people. It was an incredible time and opened our church and our communities to work that really enriched us and gave us a new understanding of what it means to be God's people. In the next slide is a definition of what it means to be a refugee. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. A refugee has a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. We'll go to the next slide. In the 1990s, Those who were approved as refugees included families coming from Bosnia, where they had been persecuted, and the lost boys of Sudan. Many of those lost boys were settled in the Lower Susquehanna Synod. There was a group under the care of Tree of Life Lutheran Church in Harrisburg. There was another group in the Lancaster area. And today, in Lancaster, we boast one of the only Sudanese congregations in the ELCA. That congregation is led by a Sudanese pastor. This was incredibly important work that Lutherans were supporting and sponsoring throughout the ELCA and setting an example for our entire nation. I am going to talk later this morning during the Sunday school hour about the work that Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service has done since the turn of this century. Currently, most of our refugees are coming from places like Somalia, where war continues to be a problem, from Sudan, again, where civil war is rife, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a group called the Rohingya, who came from Myanmar or Burma, are also among those of the greatest numbers. Our numbers have been cut back considerably in the past 2 years, but we continue to do the work, and we continue to encourage our leaders to look at this marvelous opportunity to welcome the stranger, to provide them with a new opportunity for life in our country. And we, as the people of God, walk with those who have had the opportunity to come to our country. In your bulletins this morning is a small postcard. On one side is a picture of a family, probably, I'm thinking, a family from Syria, which is another of the groups of which we've sponsored many in the past few years. And on the back of that card are listed 10 things that we can do to welcome the stranger. Things that your congregation can do, that you can do in your community, and things you can do in your daily life. I want to close by sharing with you the mission statement of Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. As a witness to God's love for all people, we stand with and advocate for migrants and refugees, transforming communities through ministries of service and justice. And I want to remind you that goodness is stronger than evil, and kindness is how we bring about the justice that God wills for all people. Amen.